Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is a movie. It isn't one we were necessarily asking for, but after the relative commercial success of Ghostbusters Afterlife, we were bound to get a sequel eventually, and I feel like this one kind of serves as a bridge movie to aesthetically connect the last one to the original two, with it being set in New York again, plus balancing both the old and the new characters. Now, does it do that well? It's hard to say. I guess it comes down to what it is you like about this franchise. It's got some decent stuff in here, but also fumbles quite a few things, making for a rather middling experience. So I found that, at least when compared to Afterlife, there was a lot more fan service and references to the original film in here. But at least in Afterlife, the callbacks were done in service of setting up the story and paying off its emotional themes. Frozen Empire just kind of goes all out on the nostalgia bait side of things. Like I said, we're back in New York City, at the original firehouse no less, and are left face to face with a few memorable ghosts from the 1984 film. Not only is Slimer in this one, but there's even a sequence with that scary old lady ghost in the library. I thought that the little Stay Puft Marshmallow Men were a bit forced into the previous movie, but they're even more over the top here. They've kind of become for Ghostbusters what the Minions are for Illumination. These weird little things that show up in their hundreds and don't really interact with the characters or the plot in any real significant way, but sometimes they do a funny thing and sell plushies. Seriously, they have no reason to be here. It was quite distracting. But these are superficial similarities, things that don't matter in the grand scheme of things, but did pull me out a little. What I found most annoying was the fact that the mayor, get this, doesn't like the Ghostbusters and wants to close them down, so they have to save the day before that can happen. Now, where have I heard that before? Oh yeah, Ghostbusters 1 and 2. I don't know why they'd repeat this plot thread again, except to force Walter Peck back into the story somehow. However, when it does deviate from the formula of the first film, Frozen Empire is actually quite compelling. They at least had the restraint to not bring back Gozer and have a secondary character be possessed for at least the fourth time. I haven't seen the 2016 reboot, does that happen in that one as well? But anyway, the main villain in this one, a spirit called Garaka's gimmick, is to spread ice and cold across the world. It's not insanely interesting, but it was nice to see a villain in one of these movies do something different. The film also makes an effort to humanize one of the ghosts, so instead of them all just being cartoonish slapstick monsters, there is actually a typical human-esque ghost in here called Melody. She's not fleshed out in any real compelling way, but the very notion that some people get stuck between realms had me wanting to learn more about them. It is a little disappointing that we don't get to explore Melody any deeper, but I think it's likely because of how the film simply has too many characters. There are so many people in this movie that they'd either have to essentially omit some of them altogether, or only spend time with them in a very superficial way. There are two characters in here that I genuinely like, and they are Phoebe and Gary. Phoebe is still the best character to come out of this franchise to me, and where she's at mentally fits right into place for someone who's been through what she has and is now in the middle of their teens. In Afterlife, her journey was about accepting to be herself, and here it's about finding her place in her own family, which works really well when paired with Paul Rudd as her new father figure. But the rest of the cast are done rather dirty with very little to do. Trevor somehow is even more pointless than he was in the last film. Lucky and Callie are basically set dressing since Gary does all the parenting here, and Nadeem is like the most annoying person in the world. It's like if you got all those bad jokes from the MCU and manifested them into a human being and then crammed him into a Ghostbusters screenplay. They try really hard to establish him as the comic relief, and I hate him. But you know who I don't hate? James Acaster. Yeah, he's in this. Don't know why, his character isn't that necessary, but I liked him anyway. Choosing to tackle so many characters means that the film is already bursting at the seams by the time you introduce the original cast. Ray is tied into the story well enough and has a decent amount to do, but Janine, Peter, and Winston feel like they're here simply to tick a box. So with all this in mind, plus the fact that they have to fit Podcast from Afterlife into this, as well as new characters like Patton Oswalt's Hubert, nothing has any room to breathe. There's too much doing too little to leave an impact. The writing overall is kind of a mixed bag. I appreciate how everything that was set up in some way did have a payoff and tied into the story some way later on. Little things like visual details on a character's design to what at first appears to be quick jokes that make a return in the climax. It's written well in that sense, but a lot of the dialogue is kind of painful. I mean, there's one or two jokes in here that work for me. The Mary Todd Lincoln one actually did get a snicker out of me, but there's also a lot of bad ones. You know that "he's right behind me, isn't he" kind of humor? There was a surprising amount of old people in my theater that loved this. One lady in front of me barely chuckled a handful of times, but the jokes just kind of made me roll my eyes. I guess it depends on your sense of humor. I think that Garaka is actually built up rather well as an antagonist. Choosing not to have him manifest straight away and instead focus on building the threat he holds ramps up the tension in an effective way and makes for what feels like a high-stakes scenario. So it's a shame that when he actually appears, it's a little anticlimactic. Garaka is a mostly CGI creation that speaks probably about 10 words maybe in the whole movie, and doesn't have an awful lot of presence. Oh, and believe it or not, this film does have a skybeam in the finale. It's 2024 and we're still doing that. My biggest gripe with the writing though is the waste of potential when it comes to interesting themes not being explored properly. At one point it starts to ask the question, what does it feel like to be a ghost? That's super interesting to consider, and it'd be nice to dive into why some spirits manifest as regular people, while some become big, silvery snake thingies. Unfortunately, it sets up the question and doesn't answer it in any real interesting way. It's just thrown aside as a piece of incidental dialogue, when I think it should have been one of the main themes of the film. As someone who thinks the original Ghostbusters is kind of overrated in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't fall too far from the bar in my eyes. Take away whatever nostalgia you have for that first movie, and it becomes apparent that this franchise just doesn't have enough meat on the bones to continue much further. But let's be honest, as unnecessary as it is, there's probably going to be another one. But as for Frozen Empire, it's watchable and even a little enjoyable, but it isn't as fun as the '84 movie and doesn't have the heart of Afterlife. So I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Thank you all very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see more stuff like this. Follow me over on Letterboxd to keep up with my film exploits, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.